She looked him in the eye, keyed the launch override, and left him to die. She told herself it was mercy. The evacuation pod could carry only one, and a warlord of the Threshy coronet did not perish on a broken rock for the sake of a human janitor. He was already bleeding from 4 places when she pulled the sash from his fist. He did not beg. He did not curse her. He looked at her the way a man looks at a door closing, and he told her, in the flat prairie drawl that had been the running joke of the summit, to make sure the door on her pod sealed all the way, or she would freeze before the hop cleared the atmosphere. Then he lifted his fire axe off the deck plate and turned to face the corridor, where 3 dozen elite assassins of the Krillin ascendancy were moving through the smoke toward him. 6 months later, she came back to collect his bones. She did not find a grave. She found a mountain of enemy dead frozen where they had fallen, a bunker floor black with a decade of scorch, and a single set of boot prints walking out. 6 hours earlier, the air in the extraction bunker tasted like copper, burnt ozone, and boiled coolant. Warlord Jarl Threshy, Nokvath An of the Threshy coronet, whose true name was a chain of jaw clicks the translator softened to Jarl, stepped down from the boarding ramp of the flagship Serenity of Kelvora with her chin plates high and her contempt warmed to a shine. She had scrubbed the war paint from the hull herself. She had ordered the hold vaults emptied of ceremonial ordnance. She had done these things because she believed that arriving at the human summit fully armed was like arriving at a child's play court in full dual lacquer. It would be laughable. It would waste the joke. The joke, in her mind, was the fleet drifting in dead space beyond the viewport, 6 patched frigates, a cracked tender, a pair of gunboats with hull scars painted over by hand, rust the color of dried lymph. The Coronet Council had labeled this fleet ornamental, a phrase written into the treaty ledger a decade ago for the same reason a hunter labels a wounded prey animal decorative when he keeps it in a cage instead of finishing it. Destroying such a fleet, the Council said, would look like cruelty in the eyes of the smaller sovereignties. Better to leave the humans their toys. Charles had come to laugh at the toys before scrapping them for salvage tin. The human liaison waited at the base of the ramp. Charles saw him, and her mandibles opened in the reflex that in her species passed for a smile. He was a slouched, sunburned biped with a thermos in one hand and a wrench belt sagging at his hip, a canvas coverall the color of dried mud, boots that had been resoled twice. His name badge, in the flat, blocky lettering of his species, read Cole Hayes. The dossier her adjutant had prepared for her that morning said he was formerly a heat exchange mechanic out of a cold prairie town called Beulah on the human homeworld, that his current assignment was fleet maintenance, and, this was the part that had made her adjutant laugh, that he cooked eggs for the fleet on the 7th day of every human week. She looked at him and thought, "They sent me their janitor." He looked at her and lifted the thermos in something that was not quite a salute. "Ma'am," he said, "there's real coffee in the galley if you want any, not the replicator stuff. I made it myself." She did not answer. She swept past him with the tail of her cloak brushing his boot, and behind her she heard him sigh, small and patient, the sigh of a man who had been sighed at his whole life. "Suit yourself," he said. And then, quieter to himself, "One of them again." She did not know that later this small remark would be the first line of the report she would carry back to the Coronet Council. She did not know she would remember it word for word. She did not, in that moment, know very much at all. The summit hall was a repurposed cargo bay, and Charles noted the offense of that with a small twitch of her upper claws. Humans had draped a red cloth over the loading beam and set out a table with drinking vessels of hammered aluminum. The coronet's own delegation was already seated. At its head, in the plumed collar of a second prince, was Verith Zahn of the coronet. A Giles' own kin, the son of her father's second nest, his hunting scales dulled by court cosmetics, his smile arranged in the exact angle a courtier learned before he could walk. He rose when she entered. "Warlord," he said, "you came in trade dress. You honor them." "I came in trade dress," she said, "because they are not worth dual lacquer." Verith laughed a short, polite laugh. The humans at the far end of the table did not laugh because they had not been told the joke. Cole Hayes stood at the back wall near the maintenance duct, thermos in hand, wrench belt hanging quiet, and he watched the room the way a man watches a boiler he does not trust. The talks began badly and got worse. The humans wanted access to the coronet's warp corridors for their trade convoys. Charles, with the languid boredom of a predator being asked whether the mouse might use her front hall, said no. Verith countered, softer, that perhaps a limited access could be discussed. Charles turned her eye plates on Verith and thought for the first time that her cousin's smile had gained a new shape. A wider shape, a shape that hung on his mouth like a coat that did not fit him. The maintenance duct behind Cole Hayes clanked once. Cole set his thermos down on a service cart. The Krillin came pouring in through the duct with plasma lash and singing blades, and Zhal's own honor guard, 6 seasoned duelists of the coronet who had bled with her on 4 worlds, fell in 6 heartbeats. She did not have time to draw. She had time only to see her cousin turn toward her, with his coat smile widening into a proper grin, and to hear him say, in the courtier's polite lilt that had been the family shame all his life, "You die decorative too, cousin." Then Cole Hayes lifted the fire axe off the bulkhead clip. It was an ordinary fire axe, the kind used for hull breaches. Tungsten cord, older than the war, its handle wrapped in fraying black tape that had been repaired 3 times by different hands. He did not draw a sidearm. He did not shout. He did not even set his boots. He walked into the plasma lash the way a man walks into a rainstorm he has already decided to cross. The first singing blade came down at his neck. He caught the shaft on the axe head with a wet, hollow chime, and he shoved the blade sideways into its owner's throat plate, and the Krillin folded around the strike with a noise Xal had never heard a Krillin make. The room went silent for 1 full heartbeat. In that silence, Xal understood in a place beneath thought that she had walked into the wrong room. Then Cole hit the second one in the hinge of the cuirass, the exact seam where the armor met the arm, and the tungsten head passed through in 1 blow, and the Krillin came apart at the shoulder, and the axe kept going and hit the 3rd Krillin in the chest, and its shield hissed and held. Cole studied the shield for 1/2 of a second, the way a man studies a stuck valve, and then he hit it again, and again, and again. Later, Xal would count. Later, in the shocked quiet of a debrief on a stolen shuttle, she would replay the sensor feed and count with her upper claws twitching, and she would arrive at 32. 32 swings of a hand axe against a Class 4 ablative shield. On the 32nd, the alloy sang and split. The rest of the corridor happened in a rush of breath and metal. Xal remembered pieces. She remembered Cole grabbing her sash and pulling her behind a bulkhead. She remembered his boot on the chest of a fallen Krillin, and his low, steady voice saying, "Stay put, ma'am. This'll be a minute." She remembered the axe coming back down the corridor after each pause, with fresh fluid on its edge. She remembered him stopping to breathe and putting a gloved hand to a long lash cut across his ribs and looking at the blood on the glove, and then wiping the glove on his coverall and going back around the corner. He killed 11 Krillin in a corridor built for 4. When it was over, he came back to her and squatted, 1 knee on the deck plate, the axe across his other knee, and he said, "Ma'am, we need to move. There's more coming through the utility ring. Can you walk?" She could not answer. Her jaw plates were locked open in a rictus her species reserved for the sight of one's own god. He nodded as if she had answered. "That's all right," he said. "I'll carry you." Then Verith's smile spoke from the smoke, and the second betrayal came. "Cousin," said Verith. He was leaning against a column at the end of the hall, unhurt, plumed collar askew, hands raised in the gesture of a courtier surrendering with regret. "You are alive. How wonderful. Now let us discuss what your death was worth." Cole rose from his crouch. He did not lift the axe. He tilted his head at Verith the way a farmer tilts his head at a rabid dog. "You in charge here?" Cole asked. Verith's coat smile widened. "I am one of several." "How many?" said Cole. "Enough." Cole nodded slow. "All right," he said. And then he did the thing that later, in the council chamber that would try Verith in his absence, would be entered into the record as the moment the coronet lost the war it did not yet know it was in. He said, without looking away from Verith and without any particular heat, 32 of 35, 3 left. Verith's coat smile did not move, but the tips of his primary claws went pale. He knew what the tally meant. Jarl, who did not, filed the words away with the censor logs. They ran then. They ran through a service passage Cole seemed to know the way a man knows the pipes in his own basement, ducking under a coolant line here, kicking a wedged access panel loose there, and behind them Jarl heard footsteps and hunting whistles, and the wet clatter of Krillin shields recharging, and Cole moved through it all at a steady, unhurried lope with her sash in his fist. They came out into the extraction bunker. The extraction bunker was a hemispherical chamber lined with launch cradles. A single escape pod sat in its socket, its indicator lights blinking amber. Cole shoved her toward it and then turned back to the corridor. "Get in," he said. "You come with me." "Won't fit," he said. "Pods rated for 1. "Then we make it fit," she said, and her voice, which had never in her life produced a plea, produced one. He looked at her a long moment. Then he shook his head and he was almost gentle about it. "Ma'am," he said, "you're going to walk out of this because your council needs to hear who bought your cousin. That takes the whole pod. Get in." She got in. Because she had understood in that same beneath-thought place that this human had already decided. "Seal the door all the way," he told her, "or you'll freeze before the hop clears atmosphere." Then he lifted his axe and turned back to the corridor, and she keyed the launch override, and the pod fired her out into the void. She thought, as the atmosphere thinned behind her, that a warlord of the Threshi coronet did not weep. She thought with more honesty that a warlord of the Threshi coronet had never before been given a reason to. The Coronet Council received her report in the great low chamber where the wall panels were carved with the names of dead cousins. Charles read her account aloud from a slate and did not add color to it. When she came to the moment, Verith's coat smile widened, and the assassins came out of the duct. 3 of the 12 councillors made small sounds in their throats and looked away. When she read the count, 32 swings of a hand axe against a Class 4 ablative shield, the eldest of the 12, an old warlord named Oseth Threshi, who had signed the ornamental designation of the human fleet with her own claw 10 years ago, said aloud, "That is not possible." Jarl set the slate down. "It is not only possible," she said, "it is recorded." "Then the human is a construct," said Oseth, "a machine dressed in skin." "The human," said Jarl, "made me coffee." The council went silent. Some of them opened their mouths and closed them again. "Where is he now?" said Oseth at last. "I left him to die," said Jarl. The silence went longer. The eldest of the 12 looked at her a long time, and finally she said very softly, "Warlord, what have we been calling ornamental for a decade?" Jarl did not answer. She was thinking of her cousin's coat smile, and of the tally the mechanic had spoken into the smoke, and of what it might mean that a heat exchange mechanic out of a cold prairie town had known, in the middle of his own dying, exactly how many of a specific thing were left. She rose, and she said the thing that would begin the rest of her life. "Councillors," she said, "give me a shuttle, a science officer, and the dossier on Cole Hayes. The real one, not the one his people gave us. I am going back to that rock." They gave her all three. The dossier they gave her, she realized on the second day of the return burn, was empty. The science officer, a young threshy named Kelvora, whose plates had not yet finished hardening, was reading a slate at Charles' elbow when he made a small, confused sound. Charles looked over. Kelvora turned the slate for her. "Warlord," he said. "I pulled the humans' file from the council archive. All of it. Every mention of a Cole Hayes across 10 years of human immigration records, service records, tax filings, and cross-referenced arrest reports. Do you see this?" "I see a file." "I see," said Kelvora, "a file that does not exist." She waited. "There is a Cole Hayes born in the town of Beulah on the human homeworld 32 of their years ago. There is a Cole Hayes enrolled in the Beulah Regional Technical School 12 years later. There is a Cole Hayes conscripted into the human Third Void Regiment 18 years ago. And there is a Cole Hayes of the Third Void, listed as killed in action 10 years ago at the fall of a colony called Alderhaven, along with the entire regiment." He turned the slate a small angle further. "There is not," he said, "a Cole Hayes on any record between the fall of Alderhaven and his sudden reappearance on our fleet, manifest 6 years ago as a heat exchange mechanic on a tender ship. It is as if the man walked out of a grave and picked up a wrench." Charles did not move for a long time. Then she said, "Read me the roster of the Third Void Regiment." Kelvora read her the roster. It was a short roster, a regiment of 35 names, all of them dead 10 years ago at Alderhaven, all of them cited posthumously with the Human Confederacy's highest honor for holding a choke point against an unnamed enemy long enough for a civilian evacuation to complete. 35 names. Charles listened to everyone. When Kelvora finished, she said, "Read them to me again," slowly. He read them again. She listened, and she watched her own claws on the table, and when he came to a name near the end of the list. Merritt Hayes, medic, twin sister to a Corporal Cole Hayes. She felt the cold of the void come into her chest for the first time in her adult life. "The sister is on that roster," she said. "She is." But there was a rumor in the summit briefing that the sister still lived, in the town of Beulah, that the mechanic sends her letters. Kelvora's plates paled a shade. "Warlord," he said, "either the roster is wrong or the letters are." "Both," said Charles, "may be true." They reached the rock on a grey dawn. It was a mining moon, atmosphere thin, gravity a hair over standard, surface pocked with the abandoned pits of a long-dead lithium operation. The extraction bunker sat at the base of a caldera half buried in slag. Charles sat down 200 paces from its door and walked in with her sidearm drawn and her chin plates low. She had come to collect bones. She did not find a grave. The corridor she had left screaming with Krillin was quiet. It was quiet in the way a killing floor is quiet after the last animal has been let out and the last drain has been washed. The bodies of the assassins were where they had fallen. Some of them had been stacked. Some of them had been searched, belts unclipped, plating pried, translator wafers pulled from throat sockets. All of them had been laid, without ceremony but without contempt, along one wall. As if a man had cleaned up his own kitchen after a long night. At the far end of the corridor, in the escape pod's empty socket, a single set of boot prints in dried coolant led out through the maintenance airlock and up onto the surface. She followed them. They went for 2 full kilometers across the slag. They ended at a service dropship half buried in ash, its ramp still down, its cabin swept clean, its logs wiped. He had walked out. He had walked out with a lung folding. She stood on the ramp of the empty dropship with the sunrise behind her and felt something that had never before touched her species. Something like fear and something like hope twisted into one plait. She did not know that 6 months earlier, in the 97 seconds it took Charles' pod to clear atmosphere, Cole Hayes had done what he did next, only because he had already decided months ago that if the trap sprung the way he was sure it would spring, he would walk out or he would not, but he would not die inside another Alderhaven while a warlord watched. She did not know that the fire axe was still with him, that he had cauterized his own ribs with a fusion torch out of the pod's emergency kit, that he had eaten field rations for 6 weeks in the pod's return berth on the slow burn to human space and lost 15 pounds, that he had refused the fleet medic on arrival and gone straight to a comms terminal to send a coded burst to a person named Merritt in a place called Beulah, that the message had contained 3 words, 2 more, coming. She did not know any of this, but she began, walking back across the slag to her shuttle in the pale sunrise of the dead moon, to suspect it. She said aloud, to no one in particular, "Kel, set course for the human fleet. We have to talk to their janitor." Kelvora, who was waiting on the shuttle's ramp with his mouth slightly ajar, said, "Warlord, we were told the janitor is dead." Charles looked back at the boot prints in the ash. "We were told a lot of things," she said. The Serenity of Kelvora rendezvoused with the human fleet in an uninhabited orbit above a gas giant 3 days later. Charles came across the docking tube in trade dress again, this time without her guard, and this time she brought a thermos. The fleet did not look ornamental up close. The rust was real. The patches were real. The hand-painted hull scars were real, but the rust was too even, laid on with the deliberate patience of a shipwright who wanted his ships to look old. The patches covered no holes. The plating beneath was fresh alloy of a grade the coronet did not manufacture. The hand-painted scars followed no pattern any battle could have drawn, but they did follow, Charles noticed, with a very cold interest, exactly the sightlines a boarding party would use to find weak points that were not there. 6 frigates, a cracked tender, 2 gunboats. She had walked into the wrong room again. She had been walking into the wrong room for a decade. Cole Hayes met her in the tender's galley. He was thinner than she remembered. There was a fresh scar across the side of his jaw, still shiny. He was pouring coffee from a battered pot into 2 mugs. One of the mugs had a chip on its rim. "Ma'am," he said. He set the chipped mug in front of her. "I put the chipped one on your side. Don't cut your face." She sat. She did not know how to begin. "Are you," she said, "the janitor?" "Yes, ma'am." "Are you a heat exchange mechanic?" "Yes, ma'am." "Do you cook eggs for the fleet on the 7th day?" "Yes, ma'am. I do a nice omelette." She drank the coffee. It was rough. It scalded her tongue plates. It was the best thing she had ever tasted in her life. She set the mug down. "Cole Hayes," she said. "Corporal, 3rd Void Regiment, killed at Alderhaven 10 years ago. Sister Merritt Hayes, medic, killed at Alderhaven 10 years ago." He did not put down his mug, but something behind his eyes moved. "Ma'am," he said, "you've been reading." "I have. That's a hard file to find." "I have a very good science officer." He nodded slowly. Then he did the thing she would later remember more clearly than any strike of any axe. He set his mug down on the counter and he sat down opposite her, and he laid his hands flat on the table between them, the way a man lays down cards he no longer wishes to hide. "Ma'am," he said, "how much of it do you want?" "All of it." He was quiet a long time. Somewhere behind the galley bulkhead, a coolant pump cycled and clicked. Outside the porthole, the gas giant burned orange. "All right," he said, "but it doesn't stay in this room. It stays with you and whoever you trust. And if you trust wrong, my sister dies, and I put an axe through your throat before the news reaches me. Is that fair?" "That is fair." "All right." He drank his coffee. "Alderhaven wasn't a battle," he said. "Alderhaven was a place where a colony of 40,000 human civilians got caught by a Krillin extermination push, and my regiment held a canyon for 6 days so the transports could get out. On the 6th night, we ran out of ammunition. We had 35 soldiers left, and about 200 Krillin were coming up the canyon. My sister was one of the 35. She was medic. She wasn't supposed to have a rifle, but she had one because we needed her to. He stopped then. He looked at his mug. Then he went on. We didn't hold the canyon with rifles that last night. We held it with axes and rebar and the shovels we had used to bury the ones who died on day 5. That was the fight we made a promise in, all of us. We each named who we were fighting for. My sister named me, I named her, and the last 3 of us named a man. A man in a grey coat. Cole's voice did not change. He walked into our regimental command tent the week before the deployment and put a briefcase on the general's desk. Then he walked out. Whatever was in that briefcase, our regiment was sold to the Krillin. We were the price the Confederacy paid for something the Confederacy wanted. I never found out what. I don't need to. I need to find him. Jal, who had been drinking, set her cup down carefully. The 3 of you, she said, you survived Alderhaven. 3 of us walked out, yes, ma'am. And you have been working, said Cole, for 10 years. For 10 years. She said very slowly, the tally, 32 of 35. He drank his coffee. I've killed 32 of the people who signed the paper that sold my regiment, he said. I have 3 left. The pump behind the bulkhead clicked again. The 3, said Jal, are still in play. One is a Krillin field general. One is a Confederacy comptroller who lives in an office on the 2nd moon of Riga Prime. One I don't know yet. The one I don't know is the one who walked into the tent. The man in the grey coat. Jal thought of her cousin's coat smile widening in the summit hall. She said, and this fleet. Cole set his mug down. Ma'am, he said, this fleet is bait. 6 frigates, a crack tender, 2 gunboats, the whole ornamental setup. The Confederacy gave it to me because they owed me a favor, and they weren't ready to say publicly that they owed me a favor. It looks like a rust bucket because I want the people I'm still hunting to think they can eat it in an afternoon. When they come for it, I finish them. When I finish them, I go home. That's the whole plan. And the crew? The crew is the crew of the 3rd Void Regiment, said Cole. Or what's left of it. We didn't all die at Alderhaven, Warlord. We just found it useful for people to think we did. Charles did not speak for a full minute. Then she said, how many, in truth? Cole looked at her with his flat, patient prairie eyes. 211, he said, on 6 frigates and a tender and 2 gunboats. All veterans of that canyon, all fighting for their own name on a list. Jal set her mug down. You are not, she said, a janitor. Ma'am, said Cole Hayes with the ghost of a smile, I am absolutely a janitor. I just also do this. She sat with that for a while. Then she took a slow breath and she asked the question that had brought her across the void. My cousin, she said, Verith Zahn. He is one of your 3? Cole considered. No, ma'am, he said. Your cousin is a middleman. He sold your fleet's course to the Krillin. He tried to sell you into that ambush at the summit, but he isn't on my list. He works for the man in the grey coat. He'll take me to him. Jal looked at Cole a long time. Then, she said, I would like to help you kill my cousin. Cole poured her another cup of coffee. Warlord, he said, I was hoping you'd say that. The plan they made in that galley was not elegant. Cole had never been an elegant tactician. He was a canyon soldier. He liked terrain that funneled things. He liked cover that could take a beating. He liked plans that had a hard second option baked in. Charles, who had spent a life in the mannered ambush politics of the coronet, found this refreshing, then unnerving, then addictive. Verith Zahn, they knew from Jal's own knowledge of coronet law, would be summoned in 6 days to the throne spire of the coronet's high seat for the quarterly rendition of the treaty ledger. This was a ceremonial duty. He would arrive with a household guard of 90 coronet duelists and a personal resonance cannon meant to protect against assassins. The throne spire had one entrance, 3 levels, and a great open receiving floor at the base where the council would sit in judgment. Idrith, standing at the ledger, would be alone at the center of the room. His guard would be arrayed around the perimeter. His cannon would be on the top level. The coronet's protocol forbade the presence of foreign weapons in the throne spire. The coronet's protocol did not, Cole pointed out politely, forbid the presence of a hand axe carried as a ceremonial gift. Jarl laughed for the first time in 10 years. "Cole Hayes," she said, "you understand my people better than my people do." "Ma'am," he said, "I understand hinges." They rehearsed the approach. They rehearsed the retreat. Cole insisted on a retreat plan, even though he did not, Hal noticed, seem particularly interested in whether he personally would use it. On the 5th day, Kelvora, the young science officer, brought Charles an urgent report from the shuttle's sensor logs, and Charles listened. And then she came to Cole in the tender's galley, and she sat down across from him with the report in her fist. "Cole," she said, "my cousin knows you are alive." Cole did not look up from the coffee he was brewing. "How does he know?" "Because there is a signal being sent from this fleet, on a Coronet encrypted channel, to my cousin's private ledger every 12 hours. It has been sending since we docked. The signal is a status ping. Are you alive?" "Yes." "No." Cole set down the coffee pot. "Who's the source?" "On this fleet," said Jarl, "there is a Coronet informant." Cole was still for a long moment. Then he said, without heat, "That would have to be someone I brought aboard with permissions, which means one of my regiment." "Yes." "Which means one of the 35 who held the canyon." Jarl did not answer. Cole rubbed a hand across his face, very slow. "Which means one of the ones who named someone at the Promise," he said. "Yes." Cole was quiet a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was very even. "Ma'am," he said, "I would like the sensor log. I would like to sit with it privately. I would like to know by evening. I would like you to stay out of it until I say." She left him the log. She went to her shuttle. She sat in the pilot's chair and watched the gas giant turn. Cole Hayes came to her cabin at the 18th hour. He looked older than he had at breakfast. "Ma'am," he said. His voice had a small, dry crack in it. "The signal source is my quartermaster, Ellis Foreman, 3rd Void, Alderhaven, named his brother at the Promise. His brother died in the canyon at dawn on the 6th day, covering our retreat to the pickup point. Ellis has been drinking for 10 years. I did not want to see it." "Cole, I am sorry." "Don't be." He was looking at the wall. "Ellis is one of my 3. She looked at him. "I thought your 3 were." "I said I didn't know the 3rd, said Cole. "I lied to you a little. I did not know if the 3rd was a man in a grey coat or a man I had already fed for 6 years. I was hoping it was the coat. It was Ellis." "What will you do?" Cole rubbed the scar on his jaw. "I'll go see Ellis," he said. "Then we'll go kill your cousin." She wanted to ask him not to go alone. She looked at him, and she did not ask him. He went. He came back 40 minutes later, alone, with his hands very clean and a small numbered dog tag in his breast pocket. He sat down at Charles' galley table and he said, without preamble, "2 of 3. "Cole," she said. "Was it?" "He asked me to," said Cole. "That was the mercy in it. He was already ashamed. He asked me if the axe would be quick. I told him yes. He said he was sorry. I told him I knew. Then he told me the name of the man in the grey coat." Charles sat forward. "Cole, the name." Cole looked at her. "Osseth Threshy," he said, "the eldest of your council. She signed the ornamental designation 10 years ago. She was also, 10 years ago, the buyer on the other end of the briefcase." Charles, who had never in her life been struck, felt as if she had been. "That is not possible," she said. "Osseth, the old warlord. She raised my father. She held my hatching. She..." She sold 35 of my people to the Krillin, said Cole, for a border moon. Then she signed a treaty labeling my next fleet ornamental, so the same trick could be run again in 10 years' time when the Krillin were ready. Your cousin Vareth is her creature. When we kill Vareth in the throne spire, Oseth will be sitting in the front row, and she will smile because she thinks she's watching a proxy war between two upstarts she doesn't have to answer for. And you will. I will name her aloud, said Cole, in the throne spire, in front of your council, in front of the recorders. Then I will finish. Jarl looked at him a long time. Cole Hayes, she said, you are a very tired man. Ma'am, he said, I have been tired for 10 years. 6 more days won't break me. She put her claw on his hand. She had never touched a human before. His skin was warmer than hers by 6 full degrees. He did not pull away. I will stand with you, she said. Ma'am, he said, I know. The throne spire of the coronet's high seat rose out of a great tidal plain of red basalt, like a spike of black glass. Its receiving floor was a circle of polished obsidian, 90 paces across, ringed by pillars of jade-green stone. On the day of the quarterly ledger, the Council of 12 sat in high-backed chairs of dark wood along the north arc of the circle. In the center stood the ledger lectern, a heavy plinth carved with the coronet's oath. To its right, this morning, stood Vareth Zahn of the coronet, plumed collar, court cosmetics, coat smile in place. To its left, in the guest position, stood warlord Shal Threshi Nokvath An in trade dress, with a small polished chest at her feet. In the chest, wrapped in a silk that was the exact color of dried lymph, lay a hand axe. Cole Hayes was not in the room. Cole Hayes was on the roof of the throne spire. He had climbed in. He had climbed the outside of a black glass spike, 300 meters tall, with a pair of magnetic hand clamps salvaged from the tender's hull repair kit, and a length of climbing line older than most of the council. He had climbed it in a coverall the color of dried mud, and he had lain flat on the flat roof plate for 2 hours in the wind while the sun came up. And now he was crouched at the seam where the roof plate met the top-level bulkhead, and he was cutting through the seam with a plasma cutter that had a small mechanical hitch in its trigger, which he tapped out of habit 3 times before every draw. The plan was simple. Vareth would read the ledger. He would come to the recitation of the ornamental clause. Shal would rise in the guest position and formally request a revision. Oseth, from her chair, would formally deny the request. This would be Vareth's cue to reply with a small, well-turned court insult, which Shal would meet with the formal declaration of grievance, which by coronet law would entitle her to present a ceremonial gift as either apology or challenge, at her sole discretion. She would open the polished chest, she would lift the axe, she would call out its name. At the naming, coal would drop from the ceiling. The plan was not elegant, but it had a hard second option baked in. Vareth read the ledger. He came to the recitation of the ornamental clause. Jarl rose. She said the words. Oseth said the words. Vareth said the well-turned court insult, which was, in the coronet's 3rd dialect, an untranslatable pun about mechanics and mothers. Shal opened the chest. She lifted the axe. She said, in the ceremonial 3rd dialect that carries in a throne spire, the way a struck bell carries, "This is the axe of Cole Hayes. He gave it to me on the 6th day of the 7th month. He asked me to remind you of it." At the naming, Cole dropped from the ceiling. He came down through the cut roof plate on a length of climbing line and landed in the ring of pillars behind Vareth's household guard. He had a wrench in his belt and a spare pistol in his coverall pocket, and he did not draw either of them. He walked forward through the household guard, and he did not run. 2 of the 90 turned toward him with plasma lash rising. He caught the first lash on his forearm. It burned through the coverall and into the skin and stopped at the bone, and he took the man's throat plate out with the edge of his hand and let the corpse fall. The second lash he took in the ribs on his left side. He kept walking. "That's twice today," he said mildly. The room went silent. He walked into the open ring. Verith turned at the ledger lectern, and his coat smile did not have time to compose itself. Cole crossed the 90 paces of polished obsidian at an unhurried lope. Jal, in the guest position, stepped forward and set the axe into his outstretched hand as he passed her, and Cole did not slow down. He reached Verith. He did not raise the axe. "Verith Zahn of the Coronet," he said, "on the recorded floor of the throne spire in the hearing of the Council of 12, I name you the middleman of Oseth Threshi, buyer of the 3rd Void Regiment at Alderhaven, and the maker of the ornamental designation of the human fleet. Do you deny it?" Verith's mandibles opened. Verith's mandibles closed. Oseth, in her high-backed chair, rose. "This is theatre," she said. "Guards." "Ma'am," said Cole to Oseth without looking at her, "if you speak again before I am done, I will finish here and come to you second, and my next word will be your name. Do you understand?" Oseth sat down. The Council of 12 sat still. The recorders, whose small green lights along the pillars had been blinking their steady 12 hertz idle, blinked now in the faster rhythm of active capture. "Verith Zahn," said Cole. "Do you deny it?" Verith's coat smile came apart. What was underneath was a face Charles had never seen on her cousin, and the sight of it hurt her in a way she had not expected. "I do not deny it," said Verith. I was, the middleman. For Oseth Threshi. For Oseth Threshi. Named for the record. Named for the record. Cole lifted the axe. He did not swing it. He rested its head on Verith's plumed collar gently, the way a butcher sets his cleaver on a joint to check the alignment before the cut. He looked for the first time at Jal. "Ma'am," he said, "he is your cousin. This is your floor. You want to do it?" Jal shook her head. Her voice, when it came, was not the voice she had walked into the throne spire with. "No," she said. "You made the promise. You keep the promise." Cole nodded. He swung. The axe went through Verith's collar and through the throat plate beneath it and stopped in the shoulder joint, and Verith fell without a sound because there was no throat left in him to make one. Cole stepped back. He looked at the Council of 12. He looked last at Oseth. "Oseth Threshi," he said. "On the recorded floor of the throne spire, in the hearing of the Council of 12, I name you the buyer of the 3rd Void Regiment at Alderhaven 10 years ago. Do you deny it?" Oseth rose slowly. Her old plates cracked audibly as she straightened. "I deny it," she said. "Do you deny," said Cole, "that on the 6th day of the 3rd month of your 90th year in the Council, you signed a Krillin-issued receipt for the sum of 1 border moon in exchange for the coordinates of Alderhaven's regimental command tent 1 week before the Krillin extermination push began?" Oseth's plates paled. "The receipt," said Cole, "is on the ledger lectern behind you. Warlord Charles placed it there this morning under the ornamental clause. It has your seal on it. Do you deny it?" Oseth turned toward the ledger lectern. She saw the parchment. She saw the seal. She did not deny it. Cole crossed the receiving floor. He did not run. He walked. Oseth's guards moved toward him, and Jal, in the guest position, said, in the ceremonial third dialect that carries, "Stand down. This is a keeping of a promise. It is the coronet's own law." The guard stood down. Cole reached the base of Oseth's chair. He looked up at her. She looked down at him. "You sold my sister," he said. "I bought a moon," said Oseth. "Yes, ma'am," said Cole. "You did." He did not lift the axe. He drew the wrench from his belt, and he set his boot on the arm of the chair, and he did the thing quickly and cleanly and without commentary, and then he came back down off the chair with the wrench black at the tip, and he walked, without looking at anyone, to the ledger lectern. He picked up the receipt. He turned to the council. "You lost a warlord today," he said, "and you gained a warlord today. The record is closed." He held out the receipt to Jal. Jal took it. She did not speak. She could not. She looked at Cole, and she saw for the first time how much blood he had lost through the coverall on his left side, and she saw the little wobble in his stance that a man gets in his knees when the last thing keeping him upright is done, and she opened her mouth to speak, and Cole put a small, patient hand on her shoulder and steadied himself, and he said, quietly, so only she could hear, "Ma'am, I'm going to need a chair in a minute, and then a doctor, and then a coffee." She got him all three in that order, but not before the door of the throne spire blew inward, and the Krillin came pouring in. Because Cole Hayes had two of his three, and because someone had told the Krillin the third would be alone in a throne spire this morning, with a wrench and a wound in his ribs, and the Krillin ascendancy had decided to come and collect. Jal, later, when the sensor recordings had been logged, and the recorders had been transcribed, and the council had done its business, would count. 240 Krillin came through the door of the throne spire that morning. They came with plasma lash and singing blade and one of the small ugly resonance cannons on a Walker chassis, and they came led by a Krillin field general in yellow banding whose name in the Krillin tongue meant something like, "He who does not miss." And he came into the throne spire with his own axe held ready because he had heard about the axe, and he wanted the story. The Council of 12 scrambled for the exits. Charles did not. Cole was leaning against the ledger lectern. He looked at the doorway. He looked at the field general. He looked at Jal. "Ma'am," he said, mild as a Sunday morning, "the second one on my list is here. Cole, you cannot fight 240 men." "Ma'am, I am not going to fight 240 men. I am going to fight one." "You cannot." "Ma'am," said Cole, "the fleet is here." She looked at him, and she understood. She had thought, until that moment, that Cole's plan had ended at Ossith. She had thought the fleet drifting above the throne spire was a symbolic escort. She had thought the 6 frigates and the cracked tender and the 2 gunboats were what she had always been told they were. She looked out through the shattered doorway. Above the black basalt plain, the sky was moving. 6 frigates, a cracked tender, 2 gunboats, sliding in one silent instant from the loose formation of a decorative escort into the tight, unfamiliar, and utterly correct configuration of a war cordon of the 3rd Void Regiment. The Krillin field general looked up through the doorway too, and his mandibles worked in a way that Jal, who had studied Krillin for 30 years, had never seen before. Because the Krillin had also thought the fleet was decorative. Cole hefted his wrench. "He who does not miss," he said, in a passable Krillin accent. "Come and stand at the lectern with me. Your 240 can wait outside. I want this one between us." He who does not miss came. Cole should not have survived it. Shal, watching from behind a pillar with her sidearm in her fist and Kelvora crouched at her ankle, would say later that she had watched 2 things at once. The throne spire receiving floor, where a bleeding janitor with a wrench faced a field general with a war axe, and the sky above the throne spire, where the ornamental fleet was, at long last, doing what it had been built to do. Above the throne spire, the human frigates fanned out into a shape none of them had a name for. It was not any formation in any manual any Krillin or Coronet strategist had ever read. It was, Jal would realize later, the shape a set of canyon walls made when you flattened them into 2 dimensions. The 2 gunboats slid into position at the choke points, exactly where a Krillin fleet's escape burn would have to pass. The tender, which Jal had assumed was a support vessel, opened along its dorsal spine to reveal an unfired railgun the length of a small city. The 6 frigates, one at a time, in a rolling ripple that took 90 seconds from first to last, lit their engines. The Krillin fleet in high orbit, a small task group of 8 cruisers escorting 3 troop ships that had come to deliver the 240 currently spilling into the throne spire, began to burn away. They did not make it. The gunboats caught them at the choke points. The tender's railgun found the lead cruiser through the escape burn and put a slug the size of a house through her engine spine, and the cruiser folded around the impact and drifted, and the 2 behind her folded around her, and the 3 troop ships, unarmed, surrendered inside 4 minutes. The 240 Krillin in the throne spire did not know any of this. They knew only that their field general was in single combat with a slouched, sunburned man in a coverall. He who does not miss was, as his name promised, a very good fighter. He had killed 60 duelists in his career. He had killed 40 of them in one afternoon on a small ice moon that his people called the Slaughter. He came at Cole Hayes with an axe held two-handed in a grip that had opened the throat plates of Threshi and Kelvora and half a dozen smaller sovereignties alike, and the first cut he made at Cole was a lateral strike at the neck that would have taken a slower man's head. Cole was not a slower man. Cole was, in fact, at that moment, one of the slower men in the room. He had a punctured left lung. He had lost blood into his coverall for 6 full minutes. He was standing only because a lectern was letting him. He caught the lateral strike on the wrench's shaft. The shaft rang. Cole's arm folded to his shoulder. He did not fall. He looked at He Who Does Not Miss, and he said very tiredly, "We are not invincible. We bleed. We break. We die. We just make you die faster." Then he shoved the wrench up into the seam under the Krillin's chin plate, and the wrench passed through the neck ring, and the Krillin field general folded across the ledger lectern. The 240 Krillin looked at their fallen general. Cole looked at them. He lifted the wrench. "Boys," he said, "you have got about a minute to walk out that door with your hands up. My people are outside. My people are the ones who used to be on the ornamental fleet. My people will not be gentle. Go." They went. They went because a Krillin without a general is a Krillin who counts the door, and because through the shattered doorway they could see, arrayed on the black basalt plain, the 211 veterans of the 3rd Void Regiment disembarked from the tender under the cover of the fleet's rearrangement in a firing line the shape of the old canyon at Alderhaven. They walked out. They put down their weapons. They lay flat on the basalt with their claws behind their heads. Cole watched them go, and then his knees did the thing they had been trying to do for the last hour. Charles reached him before he hit the floor. He was very light in her arms. He was smaller than she had expected. He was breathing wet. "Ma'am," he said. "Chair, doctor, coffee." She got him the chair. She got him the doctor. Kelvora, who had a field medic's kit under the pilot's seat of the shuttle, and who worked on Cole for 2 hours on the polished obsidian of the receiving floor, while the Coronet Council, Ashen, watched from the perimeter and did not interfere. She could not, on that day, get him the coffee. The throne spire did not have any. Cole lived. It was not a quick recovery. He spent 3 of the human weeks in a coronet infirmary bed with tubes in him, and Jal came every day. And by the 2nd week, he was well enough to complain about the food, and by the 3rd, he was well enough to complain about the coffee. He complained about the coffee for so long, and in such patient prairie detail, that Jal, who had had 4 separate briefings on the finer points of Krillin fleet doctrine that week, arranged for a shipment of raw beans from the town of Beulah on the human homeworld, and installed a small grinder in the corner of his infirmary room, and thereby, without meaning to, invented the coronet's first coffee bar. She sat with him on the last day of his stay. He was in a chair by the window. The window looked out over the tidal plain of red basalt. In the middle distance, the throne spire caught the afternoon light like a struck bell. "Cole," she said, "I have a question." "Ma'am." "Ellis," she said, "your quartermaster. He named his brother at the promise. His brother died in the canyon at dawn on the 6th day, covering your retreat. His brother was one of the 35. So Ellis was fighting for a name that stayed on the roster. And yet Ellis sold you. Why? Cole looked at his coffee. He turned the cup between his hands. "Ma'am," he said, "Ellis was fighting for a name because his brother died, but he was drinking for 10 years because he lived. And after a while, a man drinking for 10 years forgets which name he was fighting for. He starts fighting for the drink." "That is a sad thing." "Yes, Mom. And your sister, Merritt." Cole looked out the window a long time. "Mom," he said, "Merritt is not in Beulah." Giles' plates went very still. "Then where—" "Merritt is on the tender," said Cole. "She has been the second in command of the ornamental fleet for 6 years. Her name badge says Elena Ruiz. She's the one who fired the railgun through the Krillin cruiser's engine spine." Cole. "Then the letters—" "The letters," said Cole, "were for the man in the grey coat. If Osseth had been listening, and she was, she would hear that I still had a sister in Beulah, and she would come there and I would meet her at the kitchen table with the axe. That was the second option plan. It turned out to be first option day. But if today had gone differently, tomorrow was the kitchen table." Giles looked at him a long time. "Cole Hayes," she said, "you plan the way a butcher cuts." Cole smiled at her. "Ma'am," he said, "that is the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me. My grandfather was a butcher. He would have liked you." She sat with him a little longer then. The afternoon light moved across the tidal plain. The throne spire threw its long shadow east. On the near horizon, the human fleet, 6 frigates, a cracked tender, 2 gunboats, and now a captured Krillin troopship, hung in a loose orbit that was not, and would never again be, mistaken for ornamental. "Cole," said Giles, "the Council has authorized a formal accord between the Coronet and the Human Confederacy. They have offered you a moon. They have offered you a seat on the Council. They have offered you a household of 100 Coronet duelists, an armorer and a personal cook, Osseth's estate, Verith's plumed collar, anything you name." Cole looked at her. "Ma'am," he said, "does anyone on this ship know how to make real coffee?" She smiled. It was a smile that showed rows of small polished teeth. "I do," she said, "now." "Then that will do." He set down his cup. He looked out the window. "And by the way, Ma'am, I do not do windows." They walked him to the galley. She made him coffee. He drank it. He said it was passable. She said it was excellent. They agreed to differ. Outside, above the tidal plain of red basalt, above the throne spire that had learned in one morning what it had spent a decade forgetting, above the ornamental fleet that had at last stopped being ornamental, the stars of the coronet burned in their long, slow rounds. And in a small back room, of a small tender in a small piece of a very large void, a warlord of the threshy coronet, who had come to laugh at a broken thing, sat and watched a slouched, sunburned human drink her coffee, and she thought, quietly to herself, in the private third dialect of her hatching name, that the ledger had been read upside down for a very long time, and that a good janitor would be a long time in setting it right. She did not know, on that afternoon, that she would spend the rest of her long life reading it beside him, but she suspected, because that, in the end, was what the humans did. They were not invincible. They bled, they broke, they died. But when they walked into a room, everything in the room began quietly to change its mind about what it was. What a journey! What a hard and beautiful and terrible night, and what a bright and quiet morning after. The real strength in this story was never the axe or the wrench or the frigate that turned out to be a warship. The real strength was the promise made at a kitchen table by 3 tired soldiers who refused, for 10 patient years, to let a name on a roster be crossed out for nothing. If this story moved you, leave your like. It is what keeps stories like this alive out here in the dark. Share it with someone else who loves science fiction, where a small, stubborn human stares down the impossible and wins by refusing to fall. Subscribe and turn on the little bell so the next epic HFY tale finds you the moment it goes up. And tell me in the comments one honest thing. Would you have hired Cole Hayes to train your fleet, or would you have taken the moon they offered and gone home to Beulah for good coffee and a quiet porch? Keep your eyes on the empty places out there between the stars. Sometimes the quietest thing in the void is the one moving toward you.